Throughout this chapter, we've mostly been looking at how to deal with errors during development. And that's good because that's where we want to find those errors and fix them. But as hard as we might try, errors will make it into our production code, and we want to handle those errors a bit differently. Most importantly, we don't want to show the not so user-friendly error pages that we've been working with that expose a lot of our code details. It's not very classy, and it also presents a security issue. Instead, we want to turn that behavior off. We saw that previously in the config environments production.rb file. There's a configuration for consider all requests local, and by default for production, it's set to false. In development, it's set to true, and that's what displays those error pages in development for us. But if we set it to false, then it won't show those errors in the browser, and instead, it will show error pages to the user. What are those error pages? Well, Rails gives us some predefined templates for them. Inside the public folder, there's a file called 404.html, another one for 500.html, and another one for 422.html. You're probably familiar with 404 errors. It means that a page was not found, and this is typically in Rails for when find operations fail. So if we're trying to find a subject with a certain ID, and it's not found, we would get a 404 error. 500 errors are more general errors, and they typically happen when anything else goes wrong in the application. It's just a general internal server error. And then 422 is kind of a new one in Rails. The technical meaning is unprocessable entity, and it's for when an invalid request is made, and it usually pertains to REST, which is something we haven't talked about yet, but which we'll touch on in the next chapter. Without a doubt, the top two are going to be the most important ones. Now keep in mind, these are static HTML pages. They exist in the public directory, and they don't go through the entire Rails stack. So we don't have access to any Ruby code, no Rails helpers, none of our objects, no database queries or anything like that. We don't even have access to our template layouts that we've been working with. It has to be a self-contained, freestanding HTML file. Now the default versions that Rails gives you look pretty good. You can certainly just use those. But if you want your 404 and 500 pages to be branded the same way as the rest of the site, to really fit in and not make the user feel like maybe they've just jumped out of the site to an error page, but instead to feel like they're still on the same website, then you'll want to go ahead and give these the same look and feel as the rest of your application. In production, if an error comes up, not only we want to show something nicer to the user and log it to our log file so we can look at it later, what's also really helpful is if we do something called exception notification. An exception is just another way of saying an error. An exception notification will send an email notification whenever an error occurs. It's ideal for our production environment because we can launch our application and we don't have to keep going up there and looking at the log files to see if any errors come in, or remain ignorant not knowing that errors were happening. Instead, if an error happens, we get an email. And that email includes all the information that you would normally see in the development environment so that you can deal with the error. Now there's a popular library of code that will help you to do these email notifications. You can certainly write your own, and I'm sure there are other versions out there, but one of the most popular is Exception Notification. It's a plugin that you can get from GitHub, or you can get it as a gem from Ruby Gems. And we'll talk in the next chapter about how to install plugins and Ruby Gems. But I just wanted to make you aware of it here. But it's a very common thing when you put your code in production that you set up this kind of email notification to let you know when things go wrong.